I thought our anniversary would just end with a cold argument. I was wrong. It ended with my husband walking out to meet his mistress and my phone lighting up with 167 missed calls from unknown numbers. By morning, my mother-in-law was at my door promising I would lose everything. They did not know I had already made the one call that would bring a Rolls-Royce to my driveway like a death sentence. My name is Evelyn Hartwell, and at 34 years old, I thought I knew exactly how a catastrophe looked. I spent my days assessing structural damage and fraudulent claims for Mariner Shield Assurance, but nothing in my training prepared me for the quiet violence of my 10th wedding anniversary. We were seated at a corner table in the Gilded Anchor, the lights of Port Briar flickering against the dark water outside. I reached across the white tablecloth to touch my husband's hand, but Caleb pulled back as if I were made of burning coal. He stood up, buttoning his jacket with a terrifying calmness. He looked down at me, his face a smooth, unreadable mask that I did not recognize. "I am leaving. Evelyn," he said, his voice devoid of any tremor. "I am going to meet my girlfriend. We have a reservation for drinks at 9 o'clock. My breath hitched in my throat, the world tilted on its axis. I tried to speak, but the air had left my lungs. "Caleb." "Sit down," I whispered, my hands gripping the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white. "You are drunk. We can talk about this at home." He leaned in closer, and for a second, I thought he might apologize. Instead, his eyes narrowed into slits of pure malice. "Do not touch me," he hissed, the venom in his tone making me flinch. "If you try to stop me, if you make a scene, I will ruin your life. Evelyn, I will take everything. You will be nothing." He turned and walked out the glass doors without looking back once. It was not the exit of a man in the heat of passion. It was the exit of an actor who had memorized his lines perfectly. I drove home in a state of numbness that felt heavier than grief. The house was silent. Our 2 children were asleep upstairs, safe in their oblivion. I stood in the hallway, staring at the family photos on the wall, and I forced my heart to slow its frantic beating. I would not scream. I would not throw things. I went to bed fully clothed, staring at the ceiling until the sun rose. The assault began at 6 o'clock in the morning. My phone lit up. Then it lit up again. And again. I scrolled through the log with trembling fingers. 167 missed calls. They were all from different numbers, none of them saved in my contacts. It was not just harassment. It was a barrage. A notification popped up on the screen, a text message from a restricted number. Before I could fully read it, the message vanished, deleted remotely. My stomach twisted. This was not just a cheating husband. Someone was hunting me. I walked into the offices of Mariner Shield Assurance 2 hours later, wearing my professional face like a suit of armor. I went straight to my desk in the field investigation unit, burying my head in a stack of flood claim files. I needed normalcy. I needed logic. But the theater continued. Mason and Trent, 2 adjusters who usually kept their voices low, were standing by the coffee machine near my cubicle. They were speaking loudly, their voices carrying across the gray carpet with deliberate clarity. "I heard she is a stunner," Mason said, practically shouting. "Lila Vance, that is her name. Lila Vance, a model or something." "Yeah," Trent replied, glancing toward me before quickly looking away. "Rich, too. Way out of his league." I froze, my pen hovering over a document. They were bad actors. Their timing was too perfect. The name dropped with too much precision. Lila Vance. They wanted me to hear it. They wanted me to know the name. I did not turn around. I did not ask them to shut up. Instead, I opened a blank page in my notebook and wrote down the name Lila Vance. I wrote down the time. I wrote down the tone of Mason's voice. My phone buzzed against the hard surface of the desk. A new text message from a blocked ID appeared. "Stop if you want your family safe." The pen snapped in my hand. Ink bled onto my fingers. dark and permanent. The cold dread that had been pooling in my stomach solidified into something sharp and dangerous. This was no longer about a marriage falling apart. Someone was threatening my children. I wiped the ink from my hand with a tissue, my movements slow and deliberate. I looked at the screen, then at the empty chair where Caleb should have been sitting at our kitchen table this morning. "You want a war?" I whispered to the empty air. "Fine." I picked up my phone and locked it. I did not shed a single tear. I made a silent vow to the woman reflecting in my computer monitor. "I will not cry." I said to myself, "I will not cry until I have evidence." I sat at my kitchen table and divided my life into two distinct lanes of investigation. Lane 1 was the verification of Lila Vance as a legitimate threat to my marriage. Lane 2 was the digital and physical tracking of Caleb Hartwell. I could not afford to be a wife anymore. I had to be an adjuster. I met Noah Pike, an old contact from my days investigating maritime fraud, in the back lot of a rental agency. He handed me the keys to a beat-up sedan that smelled of stale coffee and cigarettes. It was a surveillance unit, equipped with tinted windows and recording gear. "You know the legal boundaries." "Evelyn," Noah said, leaning against the doorframe with a look of concern that made me uneasy. "Public property only. No audio recording in private spaces without consent. We do minimal collection for maximum defense. If this goes sideways..." "It is already sideways." "Noah," I replied, gripping the cold metal of the keys. "I just need to know where the road ends." That evening, while Caleb was in the shower, I crept into the garage. The concrete floor was cold against my bare feet. I had attached GPS trackers to cargo trucks and shipping containers 100 times, yet my hands trembled violently as I reached under the chassis of Caleb's SUV. I found the spot inside the rear wheel well and felt the magnet click into place. It was a sound of betrayal, but I forced myself to stand up and walk back inside. "Just keep breathing," I whispered to myself, clutching my chest to stop my heart from hammering against my ribs. The data began to populate my laptop screen the next morning. The dots on the map did not show a man in love. They showed a man in transit. Caleb did not go to a hotel or a luxury apartment. He stopped for 40 minutes at an abandoned container yard in the North Dock District. Then he drove to a service alley behind the old art district. Finally, the signal settled and stayed stationary at a motel on the outskirts of the city called Magnolia Court. I pulled up the social media profiles for Lila Vance. It took me 10 minutes to destroy the narrative my husband had built. Caleb claimed they had been together 2 nights ago, but Lila's timeline showed her tagged in photos at a high-profile charity gala downtown. The timestamps were indisputable. She was holding a glass of champagne in a room full of witnesses while my husband was allegedly with her. Lila was not a mistress. She was a decoy. Someone was manufacturing a scandal to hide a much darker reality. My phone buzzed on the table. It was another unknown number. This time, they left a voicemail. I played it on speaker. There was no voice, only a rhythmic mechanical tapping sound. Click, click, pause, click. It sounded like a code, or perhaps a warning shot. A chill ran down my spine. This was the kind of psychological warfare used by organized crime, not a jealous lover. Caleb returned home past midnight. The house was dark, but I was awake in the shadows of the hallway. He did not see me. He walked straight to the children's room and opened the door. I watched through the crack as he stood over their beds. He did not move. He just stared at their sleeping faces with a look of devastation that broke my resolve. He looked like a man memorizing a picture he would never see again. "I am so sorry." I heard him whisper to the dark room, his voice cracking. He closed the door and went to the guest room. I went back to my laptop and stared at the blinking cursor over the address for Magnolia Court. The GPS data predicted a pattern. He would go back there tomorrow. I was done guessing. I was done being the victim of a script I did not write. I would drive to Magnolia Court, not to catch a husband cheating on his wife, but to look into the face of the person holding the gun to his head. The paranoia did not creep in slowly. It arrived all at once, settling over my house like a heavy, suffocating blanket. I started noticing the sedan parked across the street, a nondescript gray model with windows tinted too dark for the overcast weather. Then there was the delivery driver who stood on my porch for 10 seconds too long after dropping off a package, his eyes scanning the hallway behind me with predatory interest. And exactly 3 times a night, at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and 4 o'clock in the morning, the house phone would ring. When I picked it up, there was only silence, vast and breathing. I was living inside a fishbowl, and the glass was beginning to crack. Then came Marjorie. My mother-in-law did not knock. She simply used the spare key I had been too distracted to confiscate. I found her in my kitchen, running a finger along the granite countertop as if checking for dust. "Evelyn," she said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that tasted like spoiled milk. "You look terrible. Have you been sleeping at all?" "I am fine." "Marjorie," I replied, keeping my distance. "Why are you here?" She turned to face me, her expression shifting from pity to a cold, hard sneer. "I am here because someone has to think about the future," she said. "Caleb is gone. And let us be honest, dear, what can a woman keep without a husband? This house, the lifestyle, the children." My blood ran cold. "Get out," I said, my voice shaking. "You do not understand who the Hartwell family is up against," she whispered, taking a step closer. "You are digging in places that should remain buried. If you are deemed unstable, well, courts rarely give custody to unstable mothers who imagine conspiracies." She left as quickly as she had arrived, leaving the threat hanging in the air like smoke. I stood frozen in the kitchen. Marjorie was not just a bitter mother-in-law defending her son. She knew. She knew exactly why Caleb had left. And she was terrified. She was not protecting him from me. She was protecting herself from whatever was coming for us. That evening, the silence of the house was broken by a noise from the garage. I crept to the door, pressing my ear against the wood. Caleb was there. He must have slipped in through the side entrance. I heard him pacing, his footsteps heavy and erratic. "Please." His voice drifted through the door, muffled and desperate. "Do not touch my family. I will do what you want." I said I would do it. I clamped a hand over my mouth to stifle a gasp. This was not the voice of a man enjoying a new romance. It was the voice of a man with a noose around his neck. He was begging. "Just leave Evelyn out of it," he sobbed. "She knows nothing." A moment later, the garage door opened and closed. He was gone again. I sank to the floor, my legs unable to hold my weight. He was protecting us. He had blown up our marriage not to leave me, but to save me. My phone pinged. I stared at the screen. "You are dirtying the water. If you continue, you will be an example." The threat was clear. They were watching. They knew I was listening. They knew I was investigating. I could not keep the children here. It was no longer a home, it was a target. I called Tessa, my oldest friend, and forced my voice to sound steady. "Tessa, I have a sudden work trip." I lied, hating how easily the deception came to me now. "Can the kids stay with you for a few days?" "Yes, tonight. I will drop them off in an hour." After the children were safe at Tessa's house, the house felt tomb-like. I sat on the edge of my bed, my phone in my hand. My thumb hovered over Caleb's contact name. I wanted to call him. I wanted to scream that I knew, that I could help, that we could fight this together, but I remembered the click on the line. I remembered the gray sedan. If I called him, I might just sign his death warrant. I walked to the mirror in the hallway and looked at my reflection. Dark circles bruised the skin under my eyes, but the fear that had paralyzed me was shifting. It was hardening into something sharp. "If they want me afraid," I said to the empty room, "I will turn fear into a map." I arrived at Magnolia Court exactly at noon, hours before the rendezvous was predicted to occur. The motel was a mid-century structure that had been renovated into something discreet and overpriced, the kind of place people went when they wanted to be comfortable while they destroyed their lives. I walked into the lobby with a smile that felt painted on my face. "Hi," I said to the receptionist, whose name tag read Jody. "My husband booked a room for us later." "Caleb Hartwell. It is our anniversary, and I wanted to set up a little surprise before he gets here. Is it possible to switch us to room 12? I know he prefers the corner unit because it is quieter." Jody typed on her keyboard, popping a bubble of gum. "Sure, honey," she said, handing me a key card. "Corner unit is open. Have fun." I did not have fun. I had 40 minutes of pure adrenaline. I moved with the precision of a thief. I placed a wireless pinhole camera on the top shelf of the open wardrobe, angling it toward the door and the small sitting area. Then I went outside and wedged a high-gain microphone into the gap of the air conditioning vent. It was a federal crime to record audio without consent in a private room, but I was not building a case for a court of law yet. I was building a case for my own sanity. By 1 o'clock, I was locked inside Noah's sedan, parked 3 rows back in a spot that offered a direct line of sight to room 12. I had a tablet on my lap and a bottle of water that I was too nauseous to drink. The hours dragged by. 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. The sun began to dip lower, casting long, jagged shadows across the parking lot. Every time a car drove past, my pulse spiked. At 4:15, the GPS dot on my screen merged with my location. Caleb's car turned into the lot. He parked 2 spaces away from the room, but he did not move like a lover anticipating an illicit afternoon. He sat in the car for 5 full minutes. When he finally stepped out, his posture was rigid. He checked his watch. He looked left, then right, his eyes darting with the frantic energy of a trapped animal. He did not look like he was here to have sex. He looked like he was here to surrender. He entered the room. My tablet screen flickered to life. I saw him pacing the small carpet, running his hands through his hair. 10 minutes later, a black SUV with tinted windows rolled into the lot. It was an expensive vehicle, pristine and menacing. It stopped right in front of room 12. The back door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was not Lila Vance. She was not a model. She was wearing a tailored cream suit that probably cost more than my annual salary. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. I stopped breathing. I knew her. It was Lenora Ashford, the wife of Gideon Ashford, the CEO of Ashford Maritime Group. I had shaken her hand once at a company charity dinner. She was the royalty of Port Briar, a woman who appeared on magazine covers for her philanthropy. She walked into the room without knocking. I jammed my headphones tighter against my ears. On the screen, Caleb stopped pacing. He looked terrified. Lenora did not hug him. She did not kiss him. She stood by the door, keeping a distinct distance. "You are late," Caleb said, his voice tinny through the microphone. "Stop whining," Lenora snapped. The elegance was gone from her voice, replaced by cold steel. "You dragged me into this at the exhibition. Caleb, now you have to finish it." I stared at the screen, my mind reeling. The exhibition. That was months ago. This was not an affair. This was a transaction. A deal. "I cannot do it anymore," Caleb said, stepping toward her. "Evelyn is asking questions. She knows something is wrong. Then make her stop," Lenora said, her face twisting with disdain. "Or we will make her stop." My phone buzzed in my lap, making me jump so hard I nearly dropped the tablet. I looked down. It was a text message from a blocked number. "You are in the wrong place." The blood drained from my face. I looked up at the rearview mirror, then at the surrounding cars. The message arrived exactly as I was watching them. That meant the sender was not in the room with Caleb. The sender was outside, watching me. Lila Vance was just a ghost story they had invented to keep me looking at the wrong hand. The real players were not mistresses or girlfriends. They were the people who owned half the city. And by sitting here, I had just walked onto their game board without knowing the rules. I put the car in reverse, my hands shaking so hard I could barely grip the wheel. I had to get out. The next morning, I walked into the glass tower of Ashford Maritime Group with a folder tucked under my arm and my heart hammering against my ribs. I had used my credentials from Mariner Shield Assurance to secure an emergency meeting, citing a discrepancy in a high-value risk assessment contract. It was a flimsy lie, but it was enough to get me past security and up to the 42nd floor. Gideon Ashford was waiting for me. He stood by a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the harbor, his silhouette sharp against the gray morning sky. He turned as I entered, his face a mask of polite indifference. "Ms. Hartwell," he said, gesturing to the leather chair opposite his desk. My assistant said this was urgent. Something about the shipping liability clauses I did not sit down. I walked straight to his desk, opened my folder, and pulled out the printed photograph of his wife, Lenora, standing outside room 12 at Magnolia Court. I placed it face up on the polished mahogany surface. "It has nothing to do with liability clauses." "Gideon," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. "It has to do with your wife and my husband meeting in a cheap motel on the edge of town." I expected anger. I expected him to shout, to deny, to call security. Instead, Gideon looked at the photo with a heavy, exhausting resignation. He slumped into his chair, rubbing his temples as if he had a migraine that had lasted for years. "You do not understand what you are touching, Evelyn," he said quietly. "I understand that my husband is destroying our family because he is sleeping with your wife." I snapped. Gideon let out a dry, humorless laugh. "You think this is about sex?" he asked, looking up at me with dead eyes. "If only it were that simple. Adultery is a civil problem. This is a survival problem." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Lenora has debts. Significant debts. Not to banks, but to the Black Harbor Circle." The name made the air in the room drop 10 degrees. The Black Harbor Circle was a local legend, a syndicate that controlled the docks, the unions, and the shadows between them. "She owes them," Gideon continued, his voice devoid of affection. "She acts as a courier for sensitive shipping manifests. They need to move things through the port without customs looking too closely. But Lenora cannot access the physical logs. She needed someone on the inside. Someone with clearance and a clean record. "Caleb," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "He is not her lover. He is her mule. He is the conduit," Gideon corrected. "He moves the data. Lenora passes it to the circle. The rumor of an affair. Well, that was Lenora's idea. It explains the secret meetings. It keeps the press looking for a scandal instead of a felony." I stared at him, horror rising in my throat. "And you know I asked," my voice rising. "You know she is dragging my husband into organized crime, and you just sit here. Why did you not stop it?" Gideon straightened his cuffs, his face returning to that cold, corporate mask. "I protect the reputation of this firm. Evelyn," he said simply, "a cheating wife is embarrassing. A wife trafficking for the mob is an indictment that would collapse our stock price." I thought Caleb could handle the pressure. The cruelty of his words took my breath away. He had calculated the cost of my husband's life against his quarterly earnings and decided we were expendable. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out. A new message from a restricted number flashed on the screen. "If you continue meeting Gideon, you will not go home tonight." I froze. They knew. They were watching me inside this office, 42 stories up. I grabbed the photo from the desk and shoved it back into my bag. I had to get out. I turned to the door, my legs feeling like lead. "Evelyn," Gideon called out before I reached the handle. I paused, looking back at him. He looked small behind his massive desk, a king ruling over a kingdom made of rot. "If you want to live," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "do not trust even me." I walked out of the office and into the elevator, pressing the button for the lobby with a shaking finger. I was no longer just fighting for my marriage. I was standing in the crossfire between violent criminals who wanted their money and powerful executives who wanted their silence. And I was the only one who did not have a weapon. The North Dock District was a graveyard of steel and salt. The fog rolled in off the water, thick and smelling of diesel, wrapping around the towering stacks of shipping containers like a shroud. I parked the surveillance car 3 blocks away and moved on foot, keeping to the shadows. The GPS dot on my phone screen had stopped pulsing inside a massive corrugated warehouse near Pier 9. I found a gap in the rusted metal siding, just wide enough to squeeze through. Inside, the air was stagnant and cold. High-intensity floodlights cut through the gloom, illuminating a central clearing surrounded by walls of crates. I crouched behind a blue container, my breath misting in the damp air. Voices drifted toward me, echoing off the metal roof. The middleman failed. A rough voice said, "We cannot move the inventory if the manifest is flagged." And his wife, "She is digging too deep." The skin on the back of my neck prickled. Hearing strangers discuss my life in the dark was a violation more intimate than any physical touch. They were not talking about me as a person, they were talking about me as an obstacle, a loose thread that needed to be cut. Then I saw him. Caleb walked into the circle of light. He was not bound, and no one was holding a gun to his head. He walked with the heavy, defeated gait of a man who had been summoned. It was a terrifying distinction. If they had kidnapped him, he would be a victim. But because he walked freely, he was an accomplice. They still needed him to work. He stopped in front of a man sitting on a wooden crate. The man was Royce Madden, the rumored head of the Black Harbor Circle. I had seen his mugshot in old case files, but in person. He looked less like a thug and more like a predator at rest. "I cannot lie to her anymore," Caleb said, his voice breaking. He ran a hand over his face, a gesture of pure exhaustion. "She knows something is wrong. She is going to find out." I pressed my hand over my mouth. The relief and the horror hit me simultaneously. He was not betraying me with another woman. He was lying to keep me blind, to keep me safe from these men. Royce stood up, walking slowly toward Caleb. "If your wife finds out what Lenora does," Royce said, his voice low and dangerous, "everything collapses. The route, the money, the protection. We do not have room for a hysterical housewife." "Caleb, she is not hysterical," Caleb snapped, a flash of his old spirit returning. "She is smart, smarter than any of you. That is why you are scared. That is why she is a liability." Royce countered. I shifted my weight, trying to get a better view of Caleb's face. My boot scraped against a loose piece of gravel. The sound was small, a tiny scratch in the vast silence of the warehouse, but it sounded like a gunshot. Royce's head snapped toward the darkness where I was hiding. "Check the perimeter," he ordered. A guard standing near the entrance pulled a flashlight from his belt and started walking toward my stack of containers. The beam of light sliced through the darkness, sweeping closer and closer to my boots. I stopped breathing. I had nowhere to run. If I moved, they would see me. If I stayed, they would find me. The beam hit the corner of the crate next to me. One more step, and I would be exposed. Suddenly, the heavy metal roll-up door at the far end of the warehouse rattled and began to rise. The guard spun around, his flashlight darting away from me. Gideon Ashford walked in. He was flanked by 4 men in dark suits who moved with military precision. He did not look like a CEO visiting a work site. He looked like an emperor entering a conquered city. Royce took a step back, his posture shifting from aggression to caution. "Ashford," Royce said, "you were not supposed to be here." Gideon ignored him. He walked straight into the center of the light, his polished shoes gleaming against the dirty concrete. He looked around the warehouse, his gaze sweeping over the shadows, over the crates, and finally landing with terrifying accuracy on the exact spot where I was hiding. "I know Evelyn will be here," Gideon said calmly, his voice echoing through the silent warehouse. "Do not touch her." I froze. He knew. He had not just followed me, he had anticipated me. And the way he gave the order, it was not a request. It was a command. I looked at the man I thought was a helpless victim of his wife's debts, and for the first time, I realized I had miscalculated everything. Gideon Ashford was not here to save me. He was here because he owned the game board. I stepped out from behind the wall of shipping containers and walked into the harsh glare of the floodlights. I did not run, and I did not hide. I walked with the measured pace of an insurance adjuster approaching a fraudulent accident scene. All eyes turned to me, Caleb's wide with panic, Gideon's narrowed in calculation, and Royce's burning with curiosity. "My name is Evelyn Hartwell," I said, my voice cutting through the hum of the overhead lights, "and I am the only person in this room who has not told a lie tonight." Royce Madden tilted his head, amused by my audacity. He signaled his guards to hold their fire. I pulled my tablet from my bag and held it up like a shield. "You think my husband is a liability because he is reckless," I said, looking directly at the crime boss. "But he is not reckless. He is being framed, and so are you." I swiped the screen, projecting the timeline I had built. Lila Vance was at a charity gala at 7 o'clock on Tuesday, exactly when Lenora Ashford claimed Caleb was with her. "Here is the time-stamped photo," I said, pointing to the image. "Here is the GPS log from Caleb's car. He was at the Magnolia Court Motel, and here is Lenora Ashford entering room 12 10 minutes later." I pressed play on the audio file I had recorded in the garage. Caleb's voice filled the warehouse. "Do not touch my family. I will do what you want." "He is not a lover," I stated, closing the case file with a snap. "He is a hostage. And Lenora Ashford is not just your courier. Royce. She is building a dossier to hand you over to the federals to clear her own debts." Royce looked at the tablet, then at Caleb, and finally at Gideon. The certainty in his eyes was fracturing. He realized he was the one being played. "Lenora has been skimming from the shipments," Gideon said smoothly, stepping into the gap I had created. "I have the accounting logs to prove it. Give me the Hartwells, and I will give you Lenora. It is a fair trade to clean up your operation." I looked at Gideon, and my stomach twisted. He sounded helpful, but the math in his head was wrong. "Wait," I said, turning to Gideon. "You told me in your office that you only found out about the debt last week. But this log on Lenora's encrypted drive shows a transfer authorized by your personal IP address 3 months ago." Gideon froze. The mask slipped for a fraction of a second. He was not just protecting the company reputation. He was managing the flow of money. He was hiding his own involvement. Royce saw the hesitation. The air in the warehouse shifted from a negotiation to a trial. "Call her." Royce ordered his guard, his voice low and deadly. "Get Lenora down here. Now." 20 minutes later, the black SUV returned. Lenora Ashford stepped out, looking impeccable in her cream suit, expecting a payout or a status report. When she saw me standing next to Royce, her face crumbled. The arrogance evaporated, leaving behind the raw terror of a cornered animal. "What is she doing here?" Lenora shrieked, her voice echoing off the metal walls. She looked at Gideon for support, but he stared straight ahead, cutting her loose. "I know what you did, Lenora," I said, stepping toward her. "You did not just use Caleb as a mule. You created a profile for him. The affair, the secret meetings, the paper trail. It was all designed so that when the authorities came looking, they would find a desperate husband stealing for his mistress. You were never going to pay the debt. You were going to hand them Caleb and walk away clean. Lenora backed away, shaking her head violently. No, that is not true. I did what I had to do, she yelled, her eyes darting around the room. We had a plan. We all had a plan. There is no we anymore, Royce said, stepping forward. Lenora turned on me, her eyes filled with venom. You think you are so smart. Evelyn, she spat, but you are just the last domino to fall. I did not do this alone. Your own house was open to me. Marjorie said she had done a perfect job pushing you into a corner. The name hung in the air like toxic gas. Marjorie, my mother-in-law. What did you say? I whispered. She wanted the children, Lenora sneered, desperate to share the blame. She helped us script the gaslighting. She said if we made you look unstable, she could take the kids when Caleb went to prison. Your own family sold you out. Evelyn. The betrayal hit me harder than the cold dampness of the warehouse. I looked at the woman stepping out of the shadows behind Lenora, and my breath caught in my throat. It was Marjorie. My mother-in-law walked into the circle of floodlights wearing a navy blazer and her signature pearls, her heels clicking on the concrete with the same sharp authority she used to command in the court hallways. She did not look like a grandmother. She looked like a grim reaper with a freshly pressed suit. You should have just signed the papers when Caleb asked. Evelyn, Marjorie said, her tone as casual as if she were discussing a dinner menu. It would have been cleaner. I looked at her, and the fragments of the last 48 hours slammed into place. Marjorie had spent 30 years as a senior clerk in the family court administration. She knew every loophole. She knew exactly how to build a file that would strip a mother of her rights. The 167 calls, I whispered, the realization making me nauseous. You did that. You spoofed the numbers so they would not show up on the provider logs. You wanted me to go to the police and sound insane. You were building a case to take my children on the grounds of mental instability. Marjorie smoothed her skirt, not even blinking at the accusation. My son has to live, she said, looking at Caleb with a twisted, protective fierceness. He got himself into a mess with these people. Lenora offered a way out. If Caleb took the fall for the smuggling and we painted you as unstable, we could get custody of the grandchildren and protect the Hartwell name. You are not important, dear. You are just the incubator. Mom, stop. Caleb screamed, lunging toward her, but one of Royce's guards shoved him back hard against a crate. Caleb looked at me, tears streaming down his face, his mask of indifference completely gone. Evelyn, I did not know about the custody plan. He choked out. I swear. I left the table at the anniversary dinner because they sent me a video of the kids sleeping in their beds. They said if I did not leave you and play the part of the cheating husband, they would hurt them, I thought. I thought if I made you hate me, you would stay away. I thought silence was the only way to keep you safe. I stood frozen in the center of the nightmare. To my left was my husband, broken and coerced. A man who had tried to destroy his marriage to save his family. To my right was his mother, who had coldly calculated my psychological destruction to save her social standing. And in front of me were the sharks, Gideon and Royce, watching us tear each other apart with mild amusement. Suddenly, a phone rang. It was not mine, and it was not Gideon's. It was a bulky satellite phone in Royce's jacket pocket. Royce answered it. He listened for exactly 3 seconds, and the color drained from his face. The arrogant predator vanished, replaced instantly by a man who realized he was small. Understood, Royce said into the phone, his voice tight. He hung up and looked at Gideon with wide, panicked eyes. The delivery is compromised. The investors are pulling the plug. They are sending a cleaning crew. No witnesses. Gideon's composure shattered. We had a deal, Gideon shouted, stepping back. I handle the logistics. You keep the violence off the books. I am not going down for this. There is no deal anymore, Royce hissed, pulling a heavy pistol from his waistband. If the investors find us here, We are all dead. We need to clear the board before they arrive. The warehouse dissolved into chaos. The guards raised their weapons. Marjorie screamed, finally realizing that her court connections and social status meant absolutely nothing to a bullet. Caleb threw himself in front of me, shielding my body with his. But my mind was clear. I looked at the panic around me and realized that logic, evidence, and insurance adjustments would not save us tonight. These men were afraid. They were terrified of the investors coming to kill us. I realized there was only one way out. I needed someone who frightened them more than they frightened me. I needed a monster to fight these monsters. I had one card left to play, a connection I had buried in a drawer 7 years ago and swore never to touch. I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the cold screen of my phone. I did not look at Caleb. I did not look at Marjorie. I looked at the exit, knowing that the only way to open it was to summon a ghost from my past who operated far above this messy, violent hierarchy. I raised my hands slowly, palms open, signaling a surrender I did not feel. The air in the warehouse was thick with the metallic scent of fear and the impending violence of men who had lost control. I had to buy us seconds, not minutes. "Stop," I said, keeping my voice level despite the tremors running through my legs. "I will give you everything. The drive, the cloud access keys, the physical copies. I will wipe the server logs myself. Just let Caleb walk out of here." Marjorie laughed, a sharp, jagged sound that echoed off the shipping containers. She stepped closer to me, her eyes gleaming with the arrogance of someone who believed she was untouchable because she had spent 40 years filing paperwork for powerful judges. "You think you have a card to play?" Marjorie sneered. "You think you have leverage? You are a gnat. Evelyn, do you honestly believe Mr. Sterling cares about your little USB drive?" The name hit me like a slap. Sterling. She did not mean a local official. She meant Julian Sterling, the recluse billionaire who owned half the port's infrastructure through shell companies. My mother-in-law was not just working with a local smuggling ring, she was the administrative cleaner for a titan. That was why she was so confident. She thought she was standing under an umbrella that no rain could penetrate. I did not respond to her. Instead, I slid my hand into my pocket and pressed a sequence on my phone I had programmed 2 hours ago. It sent a single encrypted file to Tessa with a terrifyingly simple instruction. "If I am not back by 10 o'clock, give this to the federal prosecutor." It was the nuclear option. If I died tonight, the information would burn them all down by morning. Royce Madden was not interested in my bargains. He checked his watch, his face twitching with anxiety. "Seal the exits." Royce barked at his guards. "No blood." "Not here. The investors want a clean disappearance. We take her to the secondary site." Make it look like a nervous breakdown that ended in a tragic fall. Caleb looked at me. His face was bruised, his shirt torn, but for the first time in months, his eyes were clear. He looked at me with a profound, agonizing apology. He knew what secondary site meant. He shifted his weight, preparing to throw himself at the guards to give me a chance to run. But we both knew it was futile. There were 4 guns pointed at our chests. I was not ready to forgive him for the lies. But I was not going to let him die for them either. Gideon Ashford edged closer to me, his expensive suit now looking like a costume he had outgrown. He smelled of sweat and expensive cologne. "You have 1 move left." "Evelyn," Gideon whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the floodlights. "I saw your personnel file from New York. I know who you saved in the fraud case 7 years ago. Call him." My head snapped toward Gideon. He knew. He had known all along that I had a ghost in my past, a favor so heavy it could tip the scales of fate. He had been waiting for me to play it because it was the only thing that could save his skin, too. I pulled my phone out. My hand was steady now. The fear had evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. I scrolled past Caleb, past Tessa, past the police, down to a number I had not dialed since the day I left my old life behind. The contact name read, August Rains. I pressed the call button. It rang once, twice. Then the line clicked open. I need you, I said. I did not give my name. I did not need to. Location, a deep voice answered instantly. North Dock, Pier 9, Warehouse 4. Look at the door, the voice said, and the line went dead. I lowered the phone. Royce stepped forward, raising his pistol to pistol whip me into submission. Drop the phone, Royce shouted. But before his hand could descend, a sound stopped him. It was not the rattle of a truck or the siren of a police car. It was a low, powerful purr, a deep vibration that seemed to resonate in the concrete floor beneath our feet. It was the sound of a 12-cylinder engine, tuned to perfection, approaching with the unstoppable momentum of a tidal wave. The heavy metal doors of the warehouse, which the guards had just begun to close, were suddenly bathed in blinding white light. A vehicle rolled into the entrance, parting the fog like a black shark moving through dark water. It was a Rolls-Royce Phantom, massive and gleaming, its presence so commanding that for a second, no one moved. The engine cut, and the silence that followed was heavier than the noise. It was not just a car. It was a verdict. The heavy silence in the warehouse was shattered by the sound of a door opening. August Rains stepped out of the back seat of the Rolls-Royce. He wore a charcoal overcoat that cost more than the building we were standing in, and his eyes held the cold, indifferent sharpness of a man who moved mountains with a signature. He was not alone. 2 lawyers in sharp suits and 4 armed private security officers with visible federal contractor badges stepped out behind him. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. August was not just a wealthy man from my past. He was the director of the Rains Integrity Fund, a private firm that investigated corporate fraud for the highest courts in the country. 7 years ago, I had uncovered a flaw in a risk model that saved his reputation. I owed him a call, but he owed me a life. Gentlemen, August said, his voice smooth and terrifyingly calm. I suggest you lower your weapons. As of 3 minutes ago, when Ms. Hartwell initiated her distress call, the entire digital contents of her cloud drive were automatically mirrored to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Cybercrimes Division. Royce Madden turned pale. The gun in his hand lowered until it pointed at the floor. If you touch her, August continued, walking toward me without fear, you are not just committing murder. You are killing a federal witness in an active investigation. The Black Harbor Circle will be dismantled by noon tomorrow. Royce looked at Lenora and Marjorie with pure hatred. He realized instantly that he had been used as a shield for their messy amateur schemes. You brought federal heat to my door, Royce hissed at Lenora. For a debt, it was not supposed to happen like this, Lenora screamed, backing away. I stepped forward, holding up my phone one last time. It is over. Lenora, I said. I pressed play on the screen. The recording from the garage echoed through the warehouse, clear and damning. It captured Lenora admitting to the smuggling scheme and, more importantly, it captured Marjorie's voice detailing how she spoofed the calls to frame me as mentally unstable to steal my children. A clean crime, I said, looking at my mother-in-law. That is what you called it. But now it is evidence of conspiracy and kidnapping. Caleb was released by the guards. He did not run to his mother. He walked toward me, stopping 5 feet away. He looked broken, stripped of the arrogance he had worn to protect us. I will sign whatever you want. Evelyn, Caleb said, his voice cracking. I will tell the prosecutors everything. I will go to prison if that is what it takes to keep you and the kids safe. I am so sorry. Gideon Ashford saw the walls closing in. He stepped away from Lenora, raising his hands. I was just the gatekeeper, Gideon stammered, looking at August. I can give you the transfer logs, I can give you the names of the real protectors in the Senate. I will trade. You coward, Lenora shrieked, but her voice was cut off as Royce grabbed her arm. She is yours, Royce said to August's security team, shoving Lenora forward. Take her. The circle is leaving. It was the ultimate betrayal. The shadow boss Lenora had relied on was not coming to save her. She collapsed on the concrete, sobbing as the security team handcuffed her. Marjorie stood alone, her face twisting into a mask of pure venom. She looked at the ruin of her plans, at her son who refused to look at her, and then at me. You have ruined this family, Marjorie spat, her voice trembling with rage. You are nobody. Evelyn, you are just a daughter-in-law. I looked at her, and for the first time in 10 years, I felt absolutely nothing for her but pity. No, Marjorie, I said, taking a restraining order from August's lawyer and placing it on the crate in front of her. I am the person who holds the evidence, and you are the one who is leaving. I turned my back on her. I walked toward the Rolls-Royce where August was waiting. He held the door open for me. The children are safe, August said quietly. My team picked them up from Tessa's house 10 minutes ago. They are waiting for you at the safe house. I stopped and looked back at Caleb one last time. He stood in the harsh light of the warehouse, watching me leave. I did not forgive him. Perhaps I never would. But as I slid into the leather seat of the car and the door closed with a solid thud, I knew I had done something more important than forgive. I had survived. I had reclaimed the pen, and I had written my own ending. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from. I would love to hear your thoughts and connect with you. Do not forget to subscribe to Mia Revenge Stories, like the video, and hit that hype button so this story can reach even more people.